April 28th, 1908. Just before dawn, on a lonely farm at the end of McClung Road outside LaPorte, Indiana, a hired man named Joe Maxon wakes to the smell of smoke. He throws open his door to find the whole upstairs already glowing. Flames climb the walls of the big square farmhouse, eating through the plaster and filling the halls with black smoke. He shouts the family's names into the roar and hears nothing back. He beats on the doors. He cannot reach the stairs. In the end, all he can do is drop from a window and run for help while the house burns down to its stone foundation behind him. When the ashes finally cool, searchers climb down into what is left of the cellar. There, in the ruin, they find the remains of 4 people. 3 children, laid close together, and 1 grown woman. The children are named right away. They are the 3 little ones who lived in that house. The woman is assumed to be their mother, the widow who owned the farm, lost in the fire while trying to save her babies. The town grieves for her. Newspapers print the sad story of the poor, unlucky widow, twice widowed already, now gone in the flames with her children. It is a tragedy, plain and simple, and people are ready to bury her that way and move on. They are wrong about almost every part of it. The woman in the cellar could not be fully identified. Her head was never recovered, not in the ashes, not anywhere. The ground behind that burned house, the soft, dark dirt of an ordinary hog pen, was about to give up a secret so large that grown men would stop counting the dead, unable to make themselves keep going. Before we walk into that yard together, do me one quick favor. If forgotten cases and old buried mysteries are the reason you clicked on this, take 1 second to subscribe, because I go looking for the stories most people have let slip away, and I would like you here for the next one. Now, let me show you what they found. Her name was Belle Gunness. History would remember her by a darker name, Hell's Belle. By the time the digging was done, she would rank among the most prolific killers America has ever produced, man or woman. But in the spring of 1908, none of that was known. What was known was that a man from South Dakota would not stop asking questions. His name was Ashley Helgalian, and he had a missing brother. Andrew Helgalian had come to LaPorte that January to marry the widow Gunness. The two had traded letters for a year and a half. Andrew, a Norwegian bachelor with money saved, had finally been talked into selling what he owned, gathering his cash, and traveling east to start a new life with the woman who wrote him such warm, loving letters. He arrived on the 3rd of January. A few days later, he walked into a LaPorte bank with Belle and drew out nearly everything he had, somewhere close to $3,000, an enormous sum for a working man of that time. After that, Andrew Helgalian vanished. His family wrote to Belle asking where he had gone. She wrote back, cool and helpful, saying Andrew had left for Chicago, or perhaps sailed home to Norway, and she politely asked them to stop bothering her. Ashley did not buy a word of it. He kept writing. He warned her plainly that he was coming to LaPorte to search for his brother himself. And then the farmhouse burned. When Asl read about the fire in the newspaper, he came anyway. He arrived in LaPorte still hunting for Andrew, and he began asking the farmhands one simple, stubborn question. Had anyone seen the widow digging out back that spring? They had. Belle Gunness had been spotted many times, out by the hog pen at night, turning over the earth. So Ashley took a spade to a low, soft, sunken patch of ground where the dirt looked wrong, and he started to dig. It did not take long. A few feet down, wrapped and hidden in the muck, he found the remains of his brother Andrew. That was the moment the story of the poor widow died forever. The sheriff's men moved in and began opening the ground across the whole property. What they uncovered is still hard to write about a century later. Once they knew to look, the whole yard seemed to be hiding something, dotted with soft depressions where the earth had settled over something buried. Grave after grave, tucked under the hog pen, near an old outhouse, out toward the water. They found the remains of 5 people on the first day, and 6 more on the second, and at that point, worn down by what kept coming out of the ground, the men simply stopped counting. In all, at least 11 were recovered, and some who studied the case later believed the true number ran far higher, possibly into the dozens. Among those they could name were Andrew Helgalian, another suitor, and a young foster daughter named Jenny Olson, a girl Belle had told neighbors was away at school in California. Most of the others were never identified at all. There was simply too little left of them to give back a name. So how did it happen? How did a middle-aged farm widow lure grown men from all across the Midwest to a remote Indiana farm, one after another, for years, without anyone raising the alarm until it was far too late? The answer had been sitting in the newspapers the whole time. Beginning around 1905, Belle Gunness had been placing advertisements in the marriage columns, especially in the Norwegian language papers. The wording was careful and clever. A comely widow, it said, owner of a large and prosperous farm in one of the finest districts of LaPorte County, wished to meet a gentleman equally well fixed, with a view to joining their two fortunes into one. There was one firm condition. No man need write unless he was serious enough to come in person and had something of his own to bring. Then came the line that would follow Belle Gunness into history. Triflers need not apply. Only serious men. Only men with money. The ads worked better than anyone could have guessed. By some accounts, her mailman carried her 8 or 10 letters a day, and she turned short-tempered on the mornings none came. She wrote back to the ones she liked in a warm, longing hand, telling each man that her heart beat wild for him, and that he should come to Indiana and stay forever. Then she added her instructions: sell your property. Take your savings out of the bank in cash. Above all, tell no one where you are going, so the happy news of your new life will be a wonderful surprise to your family later. Read that again, and you can see exactly what she was doing. She was picking out lonely men with money, and no one close enough to come looking. Immigrant bachelors, cut off from family back in Norway, with a nest egg in their pocket, and a hunger for the home cooking and the kind wife she promised. Men who could disappear and leave barely a ripple. They arrived one at a time, and the pattern held with a chilling sameness. John Moe of Minnesota showed up with about $1,000 and was never seen again. Ole Budsberg traveled down from Wisconsin, an older man, carrying roughly 1,000 of his own. Henry Gerholt came too, and his family later learned that his fur coat and his watch had stayed behind on the farm long after he was gone. Other names surfaced only later, men like George Barry, Christian Hilkven, and Emil Tell, each of whom had gathered up hundreds or thousands of dollars, written to a loving widow in Indiana, and stepped off a train into a story with no ending. Then there was Andrew Helgalian with his 3,000. Every one of them arrived hopeful, and every one of their heavy travel trunks was later found sitting in Belle's upstairs rooms, long after the man himself had supposedly gone off to the city on business. A delivery driver once remarked that Belle hauled those big wooden trunks around by herself, lifting them onto her shoulder as easily as if they were filled with feathers. A dozen trunks and more, stacked and silent, and every one of them belonged to a smiling man who had gone away and left everything he owned behind. Only one man is known to have walked into that farmhouse and walked back out alive. He was called George Anderson, a Missouri man who had come to court the widow. He ate a fine dinner at her table and went up to the guest bed. Deep in the night he woke, and Belle Gunness was standing over him in the dark, holding a candle, staring down at him with a look so cold and so wrong that it froze the breath in his chest. George Anderson did not wait to find out what she wanted. He grabbed his clothes, ran from the house, and caught the first train back to Missouri. For the rest of his life he understood exactly how close he had come, and how few had been that lucky. There was one more person tangled up in all of it, a man who would end up being the only human being ever punished for anything that happened on that farm. That man was Ray Lamphere, Belle's hired hand and on and off companion. He worked the farm, he knew its secrets, and he had grown jealous of the steady stream of well-dressed suitors who came calling as if they owned the place. In early 1908, Belle turned on him. She fired him, ran him off, and then went further, telling the whole town he was dangerous and unstable, even trying to have him declared out of his mind, so that if he ever talked, no one would listen. Days before the fire, she did something else strange. She went into town, sat down with a lawyer, and had her will drawn up, telling him she wanted to be ready for whatever might come. A healthy woman, a mother of small children, quietly arranging who would inherit her farm. Then the house burned. After his arrest for the arson, Ray Lamphere began to talk. He said what by then everyone half suspected, that Belle had lured those men through her ads, robbed them, and did away with them for their money, that she had asked him to help burn the house, and, most unsettling of all, that the woman found in the cellar was not Belle at all, but a stranger, chosen and placed there to close the case, while Belle Gunness walked away from LaPorte a free and wealthy woman. According to Lamphere, it was Ozil Helgalian's coming visit, the one relative who would not be waved off, that pushed her to burn everything, fake her own death and run. Lamphere told his story more than once, and the details did not always match. Near the end of his life, sick in the state prison, he asked a local minister to come and hear him out. The Reverend Edwin Schell wrote down what Lamphere said, had him sign it, sealed it, and locked it away in his own safe. When it finally came to light, it deepened the legend rather than settling it, one more layer over a case that refused to lie still. To understand how someone becomes capable of all this, we have to leave the burning farmhouse and go back much further, to a small, hard valley on the far side of the ocean. She was born Brynhild Paulsdatter Sturset on the 11th of November, 1859, in Selbu, Norway, the youngest of 8 children in a poor farming family. Life there was work and want, long dark winters and thin soil. As a young woman she crossed the Atlantic, following an older sister to Chicago, and somewhere along the way she shed her old name and became Belle. In the new country she took hard jobs, worked as a servant, and by some accounts spent time in a butcher's shop, learning the trade of cutting meat. In 1884 she married her first husband, a fellow Norwegian named Mads Sorensen. This is where, if you look closely, the pattern begins. The couple ran a small candy store, and it burned to the ground. They collected on the insurance. Their home burned too, and once again the insurance paid. 2 infant children in Belle's care died young, both said to have been carried off by an inflammation of the bowels, a condition that can look a great deal like poisoning to a modern eye. Belle had insured the children. She collected after each small coffin. Then, in the summer of 1900, Mads Sorensen died. Belle's account was that he had come home with a headache, that she had given him a powder for the pain, and that when she checked on him later he was gone. There was a detail nobody thought much about at the time. Mads carried 2 life insurance policies, and he happened to die on the single day when both were in force at once, the old one about to lapse and the new one just beginning. Belle collected on both, walking away with several $1,000s. With that money she left Chicago, moved to Porte, and bought the farm. In 1902 she married again, a Norwegian butcher named Belle Gunness, a big, gentle man who gave her the surname history would remember. Within a week of the wedding, Peter's small daughter from his first marriage died in Belle's care. 8 months later, Peter himself was gone. Belle's story was that a heavy sausage grinding machine had fallen from a high shelf and struck her husband on the head. The county coroner did not like it. He gathered a jury and asked hard questions. There was even a whisper carried home from the schoolyard that Belle's own foster daughter Jenny had told a friend her mama had harmed her papa. But the girl would not repeat it under oath. Belle wept and pleaded her innocence, and the matter was quietly dropped. The insurance paid once more. Every fire, every death, every small grave, another payment. By the time the suitors started arriving with their cash-stuffed coats, Belle Gunness had spent nearly 20 years learning that tragedy, in her hands, could be made to turn a profit, and that a grieving woman with soft words and wet eyes was almost never suspected of anything at all. Which brings us back to the body in the cellar, and the question no one has ever fully answered. Was it her? Almost from the start, people had doubts. A local doctor named Harry Long, who had known Belle personally, took one look at the remains and said flatly that this was not Mrs. Gunness. Belle had been a tall, heavy, powerfully built woman, well over 200 pounds. The body in the ashes was inches shorter and many pounds lighter, with soft, well-shaped arms and neat, carefully kept fingernails, the hands of a woman who did not haul trunks or do hard farm labor. Her head was missing, so there was no face to identify, and no way to be sure. There were pieces of evidence on the other side. Rings that had belonged to Belle were found on the burned hand. Her dentist came forward and identified a piece of dental work recovered from the ruins as his own, made for Belle's mouth, which some took as proof enough. But even that could be turned around. A woman as careful as Belle, others argued, was exactly the sort who would leave her own rings, even her own dental bridge, on a stand-in body to sell the story of her death. Officially, Belle Gunness was declared dead in the fire. Unofficially, half the county never believed it, and the sightings began almost at once and went on for decades. A big Norwegian woman glimpsed boarding a train here. A big Norwegian woman spotted on a Chicago street there. The local sheriff grew so tired of the rumors that he blamed a big city reporter for inventing the whole idea that Belle had escaped. But the stories would not die, because deep down the facts would not add up. A body no one could name. A woman far too small to be her. A killer who had proven, again and again, that she could plan years ahead and think of every detail. If anyone alive was capable of staging her own death and walking away, it was Belle Gunness. Years later, far away in Los Angeles, an old woman named Esther Carlson was arrested for poisoning a man for his money, and some people who had known Belle looked at that face and swore it was her. The crimes rhymed. The motive was identical. But Esther Carlson died before she ever came to trial, before anyone could be certain, and the resemblance became one more thread that led nowhere. In our own century, when investigators tried to settle the matter with modern DNA testing on the unidentified remains, the samples were too old and too degraded to give a clean answer. So the truth is this: we do not know how many people Belle Gunness took, and we do not know for certain whether she died in that fire or walked out of her own burning house and vanished into the wide country with a fortune and a terrible skill. Both of her true endings, the number of her victims and the manner of her leaving, are lost. What we do know is how she did it, and that should sit heavier than the mystery of her fate. She did not hunt in the dark. She placed advertisements in broad daylight and let her victims come to her, smiling, hopeful, glad of their luck. She chose men the world had already half forgotten, immigrants far from home, with no family close enough to ask questions, and she made sure they told no one where they were going before they came. She wore the safest disguise there is, a kind and grieving widow, a mother who set a warm table, a woman nobody thinks to fear. The horror of that farm was not that it hid a monster, it was that the monster looked, to everyone who met her, like the last person on earth who could be one. In the strange months after the graves were opened, the Gunness farm turned into a kind of grim attraction. People came by the trainload to stand at the fence and stare at the pits in the ground, and someone actually sold refreshments to the crowd while the digging went on a few feet away. That, in the end, may be the saddest detail of all. The lonely men who died there had come looking for a place to belong, and when the truth came out, strangers turned even their graves into a show. If this walk through the story of Hell's Bell held on to you the way it holds on to me, then do one last thing before you go. Hit subscribe and I will see you at the next grave we open together, because there are plenty more, and I would rather not dig alone. If there is one lesson worth carrying out of Laporte, maybe it is this: the most dangerous people are almost never the ones who look the part. They wear the kindest face in the room, and the only defense you have is to notice the cold little thing your own gut already knows, and to never fully switch it off.